All right, today we're diving into an absolute masterpiece of world literature, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. We're going to explore how this one book completely changed how the world saw an entire continent simply by telling the story from the inside.
The whole novel really boils down to one huge question. Who gets to tell a story? It sounds so simple, right? But the answer to that question, well, it can define everything about a person, a culture, and even shape history itself. You have to remember, for a long, long time, the story of Africa, at least in Western books, was almost always told by outsiders. These were stories written by Europeans that often showed Africans as, simple caricatures, or just as a backdrop for some white hero's adventure. As the great Wole Soyinka said, they show the African as the white man would see him.
But then came 1958, and everything started to change. A young writer from Nigeria, Chinua Achebe, published his very first novel, and that book sent shockwaves through the literary world. It was a total game changer.
This novel was nothing short of revolutionary. Its whole point was to grab the narrative back, to show this incredibly rich and complex Igbo society with its own laws, its own gods, its own deep humanity, right at the very moment before colonialism shattered it. This was their story, finally being told from the inside. So let's meet the man right at the center of this storm. His name is Okonkwo. He's a great warrior, a respected leader in his clan. But underneath all that strength and success, his entire life is basically run by one single, all-consuming fear. On the surface, Okonkwo is the ideal Igbo man. I mean, he was a champion wrestler, he's a successful farmer with a lot of wealth, and he's a big deal in his community, Umuofia. But all of this ambition and all this drive, it all comes from one place. He is desperate not to be anything like his father, Unuka, who he just saw as a lazy, weak failure. And this quote from the book, it just gets right to the heart of who he is. I mean, think about that. It's not monsters or enemies that scare him. It's the fear of failure, the fear of being seen as weak. And that, as we're about to see, is his fatal flaw. Now, to really get Okonkwo's world, you have to understand how structured it was. Take the Egwugwu, for instance. These figures you see, they aren't just people in costumes. They're seen as the living embodiment of the clan's ancestral spirits, and they serve as the highest court in the land. This just goes to show you, this was a society with deep, complex systems for law and spirituality. And that deep-seated fear? It very quickly leads to tragedy. The village oracle says that his adopted son Ikamafuna, a boy he genuinely loves, a boy who calls him father, has to be killed. Okonkwo is specifically told to stay away, to have no part in it, but he's terrified of looking weak, so he does the unthinkable. He's the one who strikes the killing blow. His downward spiral just keeps going. Later, at a funeral, his gun goes off by accident and it kills a young boy. Now, because it was an accident, it's considered a female crime, so he's not executed. But it's still a terrible offense, and the punishment is severe. He and his entire family are exiled for 7 years. So he's gone for 7 years, and it's during that exile that the world he once knew, the world he was a master of, begins to completely fall apart. While Okonkwo is away trying to rebuild his life, the very first white missionaries arrive in his village, Umuofia, and they don't just bring Bibles. They bring a new god, a new religion, and a completely new way of looking at the world. This is where the conflict gets so complex. Look, the Igbo tradition was powerful, but it was also really rigid. It had a strict hierarchy, and it alienated certain people, like the Osu, an outcast group who were treated as untouchable. For them and for others who felt like they were on the fringes, this new Christian faith was a revelation. It offered them a place to belong, a message of hope. So this new faith, it starts to act like a wedge, splitting the community right down the middle. And the most painful cut for Okonkwo, it hits home. His own son, Nwoye, who was always troubled by his father's harshness, especially after Ikemafuna's death, is captivated by the new religion and leaves his family to join the church. So after 7 long years, Okonkwo finally comes home. He's planning to reclaim his spot as a powerful leader. But the home he comes back to, well, it's not the one he left. And his rigid, unbending personality is on a direct collision course with this new reality. Umuofia has been turned upside down. The missionaries aren't just preaching anymore. Oh no, they've brought a colonial government with them. Now there's a district commissioner, a court with judges, and prison guards to enforce their new laws, completely ignoring the traditions of the clan. And from here, things just escalate fast.
First, a Christian convert does the unthinkable. He unmasks one of the Igwu in public, which is like killing an ancestral spirit. The clan is outraged and retaliates by burning down the church. The colonial government then steps in, arrests Okonkwo and the other leaders, and humiliates them. Finally, pushed to his absolute limit, Okonkwo decides to act. He kills a court messenger, thinking this will finally ignite the rebellion he's been waiting for. But this is the devastating moment. The spark he was hoping for, it doesn't catch. Instead of rising up with him, the crowd just backs away in fear and confusion. And in that moment, Okonkwo realizes the will of his people has been broken. He is totally, completely alone. And this quote from his best friend, Obirika, just perfectly sums up the whole tragedy. He sees what Okonkwo's rage blinds him to. The white man didn't just fight them with guns. He acted like a knife, cutting the cultural threads, the beliefs, the very things that held them all together. And now, they've fallen apart. Defeated, knowing he'll be captured and tried in the white man's court, Okonkwo hangs himself. And the irony is just brutal. This man, who lived his entire life in mortal terror of being seen as weak or shameful, ends up dying in a way that his culture considers an abomination, a terrible disgrace. But the book doesn't end there. And these last few moments are absolutely chilling. They bring us right back to where we started, to that question about who gets to tell the story. The district commissioner shows up to find Okonkwo's body, and because suicide is such a taboo, his own clansmen can't even touch him to bury him. So they ask the commissioner to have his men take the body down. And this is the final gut punch. The commissioner looks at this immense tragedy, the life and death of this great, complicated man, the collapse of an entire way of life, and you know what he thinks? He thinks this story might make for an interesting paragraph in the book he's writing, a book called The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. And that's where Achebe leaves us. For hundreds of years, it was the district commissioners of the world who told the story. Things Fall Apart was the answer to that. It was a reclamation of history itself, and it forces us, even today, to always ask, whose version of the story are we getting? And more importantly, who is holding the pen?